What's going on, everyone? So, in Scream 5, they introduced us to Sidney, the mother. And that is a very interesting aspect, right? Because we didn't really get any details in that regard in Scream 4. Now, you can easily write that off as like, hey, she was doing a book tour, she wasn't with her family, she was kind of, distracted, going about her business, and then all of a sudden, Ghostface shows up and she's just trying to survive and navigate. She doesn't want her family involved, right? You could kind of use ways to kind of justify that not being a thing. And then Scream 5, you have the introduction, or maybe she just had kids going into Scream 5. Now, when you look it up, it says that she has 3 kids. We don't really have any concrete proof or evidence in the film. So, they could basically approach this any way that they want, right? They could easily say that she has a daughter that's 16, 17, 18, depending on when they had the kid, or a son, or whatever. Or she could have multiple kids, right? The only thing we see is her jogging and pushing a stroller. That could be her most recent kid, right? Like she could have other children before that. But regardless, one of the big things that I've talked about heavily is if they're going to have Sidney in Scream 7, you have to dive into her family life. You have to give us some glimpse. Now, there's rumors going around right now. Again, rumors. So always take this stuff with a grain of salt. But it does make a lot of sense. So Patrick Dempsey is supposedly in negotiations to potentially return to the Scream franchise. It was always one of those things like, oh, we'll probably never get him back. But he did the Thanksgiving film. And with that, it kind of was like, oh, hey, maybe since he's doing slasher films, maybe he'd be more than willing to kind of bring back his talents to the Scream franchise and play Mark Kincaid. And especially with Scream 5, you got to imagine that them making Mark Kincaid Sidney's husband, that at some point they must have had some level of expectations to bring back Patrick Dempsey. And another thing is like, why have it be Mark Kincaid if you were never going to be able to get Patrick Dempsey back? So my guess, and this is just a pure guess, they planned on establishing that for Scream 5, and then Scream 6, they were probably hopeful that they could get Nev and Patrick back and then kind of maybe expand a little bit there. But then when everything happened with Nev Campbell, that kind of fell through. Now you got Scream 7, now Nev's back on, and now it's like, hey, let's get Patrick Dempsey back. And that, because, you kind of painted yourself into this corner. Now, movie-wise, I guess you could argue all they said was, how's Mark? Right? They didn't say how's Kincaid, how's this, how's that. So I guess you could always just like, oh, it's a different Mark. But then you have Nev herself confirm in an interview, in a public interview, that it is Mark Kincaid, right? And she talks about how weird it is that they, played a brother and sister in the past, and now they're married with kids, right? So it's just, regardless, however you're going to approach this, you got to get Mark Kincaid back. You got to get Patrick Dempsey back. Because, again, are you going to have another film where you kind of just brush over and ignore the father, husband, and Sidney's other half, right? Because it's like, okay, again, Scream 4, Sidney goes on a book tour. Sidney goes to just, thinks it's just going to be a normal thing, sign some autographs, cool. Ghostface ensues, right? She didn't expect it. It wasn't planned. It wasn't like in Scream 5, she went to Ghostface, right? So you can justify, okay, Mark not being in the picture. Scream 5, one of the things that drives me crazy about Scream 5 is like, where was Mark, right? Because they established that he's married in the film to her. And it's like, if my wife was going to go take on a psychotic killer, she's not doing that alone, right? And I get, okay, well, what about the children? Like, send the kids to a relative. Send them wherever, right? Mark Kincaid's a detective. Call some detective buddies and, hey, I need you to watch my kids and watch them good, right? I need to go help Sid, whatever. You do something, you figure it out. Right? I'm not letting my wife go take on Ghostface by themselves. Right? Like, so, okay, fine. You brush over that Scream 5. You can't do that again. Right? It's like, dude, how bad of a husband is Mark Kincaid at that point? It's like this dude's just letting Sidney go and take on Ghostface by herself in every film. and it's like he's just at home chilling. Like, what has happened? And I get, like, again, you could argue like, oh, no, he's making sure that kids are safe. It's just silly, right? Like, why have Mark Kincaid be her husband and establish that and the father of the children if you're never going to have him in this film? So the rumors that are coming out is that, hey, you're going to get a good look into Sidney's life, that you're going to get a good look into the family. You should. You got to at this point, in my opinion. And look, I talked about this before the rumors even came out because it's something that needs to happen, right? It's something that we need to see develop. We need to see the relationship between Mark and Sidney, right? The last time we saw these two was in Scream 3, and the last thing we saw was him hanging out with Sidney at the house and getting ready to enjoy a scary movie, right? At some point, you need to have that dynamic and see, what does the husband and wife version look like? What do the kids look like? How old are the kids? What's the approach here, right? Like, no, does this movie, I've talked about, maybe they even center this movie around one of the kids, right? Because you could easily, Scream 3 came out in 2000, right? She could have had a kid in 2008, and by the time this movie came out, the kid would be 17, 16, right? So you could easily have an explanation to where it's like, she didn't have to have kids right away, but did she wait 20 years before she had kids, like with Mark? Like, what is that? Is the kid adopted? Like, what is going on here, right? Like, to me, I think you have an opportunity here to really tell a great story around Sidney, the family, and just Sidney, the mother, and the wife, and like, how is that dynamic, and how does Ghostface returning impact that? What is her instincts? How does she feel? Like, is she worried about her kids? Do they kidnap one of the kids? Like, what ends up happening here? Is Mark in danger? Now she has to go save Mark. Right? There's so many possibilities and so many various outcomes in which you can create that would add such a cool, unique take to the Scream franchise that we haven't really had. We never really had that family dynamic where the family's trying to survive a Ghostface attack, right? Where Sidney is now put in a position where she's vulnerable in a way she's never been vulnerable before. Because it's always kind of just been her, right? Well, now she has children. Now she has a weak point. Now she has a weakness. She has a husband that she cares and loves for, and now is a weak point, right? Like, all of these things. Do they, you could even, have it as Mark Kincaid involved, right? He was creepy in Scream 3. Like, did he actually do this? And you have this setup, and maybe Nev starts, or Sidney starts to second guess Mark and is like, wait a minute, Mark, like, like, how do I know that he's not? Or maybe you have something where maybe Mark had information that he kept from Sidney all this time, and it's impactful now, and now it causes a little bit of a rift. And now that you got this underlining, there's so many creatives in which you can approach with Sidney and Mark Kincaid and just go in the family dynamic. I really hope that they dive into this. I really hope we get a good insight. I'm not saying you have to make the entire movie about it, but we need to have a couple scenes, kind of get to know the wife and the mother version of Sidney Prescott, kind of get to feel the kids, kind of get to feel, the husband, right? Like, get a good sense of the family dynamic and the characters that you're creating, right? Does Sidney have an older daughter? Do you kind of go the H2O route, right? Where Sidney now is grown and now the mother's the target, and it's like, I was 16, right? Like, you kind of have that whole thing. I don't know. I really hope that they do a good, convincing job in that regard, but we'll see. I'm excited that, assuming this rumor is true, again, take it with a huge grain of salt, right? Nothing's confirmed until it's confirmed, right? Everything's just rumor at this point until we actually get the confirmation from the studio or whatever. But that being said, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question on to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Are you excited for a family dynamic? Do you really want to see that? Do you really want to get a good look and insight into the world of Sidney Prescott as the wife and mother and whatnot? Do you feel that Mark Kincaid has to be in this film? Or do you think that they can kind of get away with another film without Kincaid being in the film? Also, again, if they can't get Patrick Dempsey, do they kind of just say it's a different Mark? I know Nev confirmed it in the real world, but it was never confirmed in the movie, and they could just kind of brush that off and ignore it. How many people have actually seen that interview and are aware of it? Again, us diehards might know, but the casual fan, they just saw the movie and just heard the name Mark, right? They might have not even have put two and two together, or even know that that's supposed to be Mark Kincaid. It could be something completely different. So just something to keep in mind, just a thought. But Ken, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. So let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you have this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. Helps me enjoy these types of videos. Truly appreciate it. Not subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.